how do you say stuff that you have to say to difficult people? How do you get said to somebody, I'm not picking you any particular reason here, right? How do you get said to somebody something that needs to be said, but you're not quite sure how to without rocking the boat? You know, the sort of situation where somebody's doing something which is, I know they're eating noisily or something like that, and you think, I should actually say something, but I'm not quite sure how to, because you're a bit worried about whether the person's going to get angry and retaliate, or they're going to burst into tears. And quite often in a tricky situation like that, we think, nah, I'll leave it. Good idea, no, because the person carries on doing whatever it is that's upsetting the people around them, probably blissfully unaware of the effect they're having on the team, right? Because every time they do it again, it gets even harder to say something appropriate because everybody's getting frazzled by it. And maybe 6 months down the track, it happens one more time. Woof, there's this major eruption, way out of proportion what's just happened because of all the stuff that's been picking away in the background. And wouldn't it have been neat when we realized right at the beginning there was something that needed to be said, that we could have said something appropriate, nip it in the bud, stopping it becoming a major. And you all sort of know the sort of situations I mean. You're probably also realizing that's not just at work. I get people saying to me, David, you do teenagers? Or you've given me a couple of tips to handle my partner. So these are like life skills. But of course, in the business place as well, you're working in teams as well, quite often under a bit of pressure. And suddenly people get a bit more ratty when the pressure's on and the stress is there. You've probably got some agitated clients sometimes, or you might even be the meat in the sandwich between other people's disagreements. So I want to give you a few tips on sort of approaching conflict. Before we get really into it, though, can I just do a quick survey here? Can I get you all, please, I'd like you all to give yourself a self-rating when it comes to your ability to handle conflict. Right? Self-rate on a sliding scale from 1 through to 10, where 1 is absolutely tragic, it's terrible. Why? For a couple of reasons. Either because I will avoid it at all costs, and just for the sake of harmony, I'll walk away. Or I tend to go in rather too strong. I tend to hit people by the second sentence. I'm a bull at a gate with a very short rag. So that will be 1 down the bottom end. That's pretty tragic. That's a 1. Right through to 10 being, David, I am sensational at this. They should make documentaries about me. I'm so good. In fact, David, you sit down, I'll run the session. So that will be like a 10. So got the scale. Can I get a bit of a show about how you reckon you are at handling conflict on that 1 to 10 scale? Who would say, to be quite honest, I'm down the bottom end for either of those two reasons? Between about a 1 and a 3. Anybody put themselves, it's like, because we'd rather avoid it, maybe? Or you go in, it's like harmony would suit me best. That would, honest answers, thank you very much. Who would say you're medium? It's been about a 4 and a 6, like not bad if I have to. I'd rather not, but if I have to, I'm okay. Well done. Okay, and who would say they're pretty good? It's between about a 7 and a 10. Great, thank you. I'll pick your brains later, right? But we all, now getting into it then really, so we've got an idea. By the way, can I just say, I get people saying, well, at work, I'm this score. Outside of work, I'm a different score. Or with most people, I'm fine, but with my teenage son, where the passion is there, then it's harder. So it can vary as well. But anyway, a few tips around this. First of all, let me just ask a question again then now. Hands up all those people here who've ever experienced conflict. That's the first lesson. Sorry, folks, but basically conflict is part of life. Yeah, we will not get through life avoiding it. It will occur. Why? Because whenever you get more than 1 or 2 people involved in any situation for any length of time over certain things, over certain issues, perspectives clash, personal boundaries rub up against each other, conflict will occur. The skill in life, I believe, is when it occurs, because it will, how well do we handle it? However, as we've somehow experienced just now, there are some people that you might even be 1 or 2 of us in the room here right now, who get blown away by conflict. They will avoid it at all costs. And they will give concession after concession after concession just to stay friends. The sort of, anything for harmony, right? There are other people, and again, you might be one of them, who get their retaliation in first, and they will steamroller their way through a conflict situation. Again, not very satisfactory, especially if you've got to stay in a relationship with the person you've just trampled. Can you see there's probably a happy medium between those 2 extremes. So I'd like, if I may, to share with you my perspective on conflict in terms of a simple diagram, a simple analogy. I'd like you all to imagine, please, a great big field, a great big paddock, which is about 100 meters down each fence line. Got it? In the middle of each fence, looking into the field, is a person with a cell phone. Typical everyday situation. They're so far apart, they can't have an ordinary conversation, so they're on this sort of conference call, discussing amongst themselves what they can see in the field. Inside the field, inside the paddock, is a great big ball, a great big, hot air balloon. which is black on one side and white on the other. And they're discussing the situation. So this one starts off, well, chaps, pretty straightforward, great big black hot air balloon. This one says, what? Bullshit. Hot air balloon, maybe, but it's white. Then, of course, this one joins in. No, you're both wrong. It's black on the left and it's white on the right. Then, of course, no, you're back to front. It's white on the left and it's black on the right. And then they argue. And as you can see from this diagram, a couple of very important points. Firstly, would you please note that this argument will last forever, yeah? While each person insists that everybody else has got to see it his or her way. But would you please notice something else here? Would you please note that everybody here is speaking his or her truth, yeah? No one's being awkward for the sake of it. No one is more right than anybody else. But this will go on for a while. Each person says, you've got to see it my way. And sadly, in most fights, that's where it gets stuck. So who's right and who's wrong? It'll stay then in that rather stalemate, aggressive situation till something rather splendid happens. Until one person, and I believe it's the bravest person, and this is the person I'd like each one of you to become from now on in any situation like this, but in one person actually stops for a moment and thinks to themselves, hang on a minute, let me put my point of view to one side for a moment and let me find out why someone else sees it so differently. Now, I say the bravest person for one main reason, because here's a person who realizes that listening to someone else's point of view doesn't necessarily mean that I agree with it. Can I say that again? Because that's quite important, actually. Listening to someone's point of view doesn't mean I agree with it. I'm just listening to it, yeah? Understanding someone else's point of view doesn't mean I agree, but I can understand it. You've heard the phrase, walking in someone else's shoes, someone else's moccasins, right? So this person puts their view to one side, rings round the corner, and says, excuse me, mate, I see it black, but you're saying you see it black and white? Well, how come, whereabouts are you that you see it that way? Now, what's the difference in my communication style when I'm saying, so how do you see it? I suppose you're wrong, it's black. What's the difference in my style? Anybody? Yeah, it's a gentler energy, would you agree? It's far more cooperative. Notice the body language, open palms, I'm being receptive rather than, I'm asking a question rather than making a statement. So it's a far more cooperative, gentler, supportive energy given. How's this person likely to respond? How would you respond, do you think? When this person realizes this gentler, more respectful energy coming towards them, and they also realize it's genuinely meant. How do you think you might respond in a situation like that? Anybody? Yeah, chances are you're somehow going to reciprocate. And chances are you'd say to me, well, thanks for asking, Dave. I'm actually 50 meters in from this fence post. But then his next sentence is going to be, but whereabouts are you that you see it all black? Whoa! Something rather awesome just happened there. In just 2 sentences, these two people, instead of defending their own point of view, are now somehow saying, how can they both be? Big step. Imagine if this was to get really exciting and was to spread to all 4 people. Can you see these 4 people, if they worked together, saying, whereabouts are you, how do you see it? Whereabouts are you, what can you see? And they were to pool their different perspectives and share that information around, that after a while, they'd build up a pretty good idea of what the overall situation actually is. Yeah? Good diagram, eh? Yeah? If nothing else happens as a result of me meeting you today, but you remember the ball in the paddock, I will be thrilled. This has saved my skin on so many occasions. When somebody comes along with some pea-brained idea, what the... No, let me find out why, right? Now, let me just leave this pickling away in your subconscious while I try a couple of things out on you. Before I do that, just in terms of types of conflict, some of it's very obvious, very open, would you agree? Some of it can be quite subtle. People can put each other down in a very gentle way. I've just got a couple of cartoons. I collect cartoons, so it's just a couple of cartoons that illustrate. That's a pretty obvious type of conflict. Sometimes it can get a bit subtler than that. Here's an example. When I'm teaching performance feedback, I quite like using this one. Where people sort of get back at you in a sort of a subtler sort of way. Here's another one which is even more sort of gentle, shall we say, but nonetheless can be quite corrosive. Right. So, back to this though. So you've got the picture of the ball in the paddock. Now let me just try something out on you as this sort of soaks into your subconscious. Who's seen that picture before? Okay, now if you haven't, doesn't matter. If you have, that's fine. Hands up all those people who, whilst looking at that, can see in that the face of an old woman. Okay, most of us. Who can see a young lady? Who can see both? Who can't see the old woman? Is anybody who can't see the old woman? Thank you for that honest answer. I'll try and point this out on you. I think this is there's her mouth. There's her chin. There's her nose. There's her eye, like a big face looking down. Got it? Yeah, okay, good. Anybody not see the young lady? I find that harder to see, actually. There's her chin. There's her nose and her eyelashes sort of in profile looking to the side. That's her ear. Got it? Can we all see both now? Yeah, good. Now, I've done this, as you can imagine, I've done this many a time where I put this up in front of 100 people. And 50 people said, it's an old woman. And rubbish, it's a young lady. And they're both right, depending on how you look at it. And as I'm chatting away to you right now, you can flick, can you not, from one to the other. Yeah? And how you do that will probably vary from person to person. But chances are, it's the way that you interpret one particular feature. For example, if you decide that's an ear, it becomes a young woman. If you decide it's an eye, it becomes the old lady, or however we do it. Now, I believe that life is like that. And as I get older and wiser, and I think there has to be some compensation for age, I'm hoping it's wisdom, right? When somebody sees something differently to me, my response to that now is, teach me how to see it your way too. Because if I can see it your way as well as my own, I'm in a better position to make some sort of assessment of this. Now, just before I move on from this, I put this up in front of a firm of accountants, interestingly enough, about 4 years ago. The senior accountant in this particular company looked at this, couldn't see in that the face of an old woman or a young lady. He could see a sheep. Now, don't ask me how. I think that was some sort of a horn at the top there. The point is, he wasn't wrong. He just obviously looked at the world in a rather different way to the rest of us, right? But who, for example, has ever laid down in a field with a couple of kids looking up at the clouds? You know, and what you see depends very much on who you are. Or another example, you know those speckledy pictures? If you go slightly cross-eyed, you're meant to see them in 3D? Yeah? Anybody have any difficulty with those? Okay, so there's an example of I can't see it, so teach me, rather than I can't see it, so you're wrong, right? Now, just before I move on from this, I have used this picture to illustrate this point probably about 4 times a week for about the last 8 years. I have looked at this picture more than most people on the planet. And there was a young guy in one of my workshops, he said, David, he said, I love the way you've done that, he said, but just before you take it down, he said, especially I like the way you tie it in with the boy in the paddock. Before you take it down, though, he says, have you seen the kiwis? Pardon? Have you seen the baby kiwi and the mummy kiwi? And of course, there's the baby kiwi. There's mum just leaving the picture. Now, I'd never seen that before. Now, when I put that up, that's the first thing I notice before I notice all the other stuff. So can you see the point I'm making here? There is not a correct way to see that picture. It can be seen in different ways. There's not a correct way to see a situation. It can be seen in different ways. And if we're aware of that, it just stops us going in quite so one-eyed into a situation when we thought, I've decided how it's going to be. I'll go through the motions of this, but I'm not going to actually listen to it. Got the idea? There may be other ways where it can be seen. Just before I take that down, by the way, I was doing some work in Los Angeles recently, and there was a Native American Indian, was one of the people in the workshop, who was half Cherokee. And when he looked at that picture, he was apparently incredibly drawn to this shape up here, as being like the head of an eagle, because in his mythology and culture that was a recurring theme. So he saw more in that than the rest of us did, because he was almost like primed to do so. So it can be seen in different ways. Back to this for a moment. Would you also agree that as we look at anything in life, how we tend to see anything in life depends quite a bit on the background against which we see it? Yeah? And the background against which we see anything in life is our own life. And we'll see things differently if we're an only child, if we're one of 12. We come from a South Pacific island. We come from Eastern Europe. Yeah? If we're a man or a woman, does that make a difference? Oh, yes. If we're elderly, if we're young, if we're healthy, if these are all like tints to our lenses affecting how we perceive things. That being a case, then, that the background makes a difference, which one of those 3 boys is the tallest? Which one's the tallest? Speak to me. Anybody? And yeah, if you weren't suspicious of me, right? If you just, you don't trust me at all now, right? But if you just saw that out the blue, would you agree most of you would say the one at the back is obviously the tallest one, right? However, quite a few of you also realize, however, though, if you took away the background, so there was no background, and I can't reach up there to show it, but trust me on this, if they took away the background so there was no background up there, what have we actually got there? We have got 3 identical figures. However, the background is distorting their importance, making this one seem incredibly significant and this one seem trivial. Now, what I'm saying here is, if in a conflict situation someone's getting really wound up about something and you're thinking to yourself, what's the big deal here? Find out why. Because chances are it's not the issue itself that's the problem, so much as something else that's going on in that person's life, right? For example, I asked Richard to work the weekend one weekend, and normally he's thrilled to do that. Yeah, right. And then one particular time I ask him, he gets very agitated. Rather than me then pulling rank and start to come the heavy with him, if I was to stop and find out why, it might turn out that his mother's really sick right now, in which case the issue isn't actually working the weekend at all. It's not being available for his family. Yeah? Question, have we all got a background? Hopefully, hopefully we have, right? There's more to us than just our job. No, hopefully we've all got a background. Please, can I get us to remember that applies to every person we meet, every colleague in the room with you right now, every person who walks in off the street, every person who rings up on the phone. And if they've just found out that their mum's got cancer, or their car's been towed away, or they've got to get out of the house by the end of the week, or whatever it is, can you see that's probably going to affect how they respond to you far more than what you're actually saying to them? Yeah. I mean, would you agree, for example, you have a lovely weekend with your family, you're hunting and fishing and you're relaxed and everything, you get to work on a Monday morning, never mind what happens, you can handle it. Yep, she'll be right, water off a duck's back, you're bulletproof. Would you also agree there are times when you go to work where the smallest little thing is going to be the final straw because you're already at the end of your tether? Would that be true? I've realized for me, for example, about 85% of how I handle a situation depends on where I'm at. Nothing to do with the situation. And it's probably the same for most of you as well. Make sense? Yeah. So, just having that in the background, things may not be as they first appear is already a bit of wisdom that could be very useful sometimes when we're trying to resolve a conflict situation. Moving on now, now you're tuned into this a little bit. Here's another example of something that may not be quite as it appears. You see those lines going across that square? Are they straight or are they curved? They're actually dead straight. They're actually parallel. But can you see they look as if they're sort of beveled out? Things are not as they first. The background's distorting stuff. Things are not as they first appear. Would you also agree, by the way, when you go into a meeting and you are of an open mind, like you know how you see it, but you're quite intrigued to see how else it can be seen, do you think people pick up on that openness? Yeah. Would you also agree the opposite can happen? If you're walking in there, going through the motions of the meeting, but you've already decided, do you think people pick up on that too? Yeah. So if I'm nothing else but just putting a bit of doubt in your mind, that actually how I see it may not be the whole story. That's not a bad perception to have when you're walking in to negotiate something. And one final one here. I'll just make sure I get the arrow the right way up on this one. Yeah, who can tell me what those black shapes mean? Can you all see the word, like the white word fly, like white on black? Right? There are some people who for the life of them cannot see that. They're the same people who say, in the NZI symbol, where's the Z? The guy who saw the sheep took this away for a week and couldn't find it. He took it to his RSA. All his mates, he couldn't see it. Even when we covered everything up, so all there was a black sheet of paper with the white word fly, he still couldn't see it because he was so hooked into the black arrow pointing down, he couldn't sort of disconnect and see it the other way around. So believe it or not, there's a skill in seeing that, and we have to sometimes help other people who don't quite see it as well as we do. Got the idea? So things are not as they first appear. Now, what I'd like to do, if I may, is just give you an example of how I've used this in my life. And then, of course, the skills are for you to be thinking, so how does that apply in some of the situations you find yourselves in? I was asked to chair a meeting probably the best part of 10 years ago now for the Auckland Regional Council. They wanted to create a regional policy all around the Auckland region on recycling. And especially, waste minimisation, especially the education around it. But as those of you, especially who are from Auckland, will realise this, but until very recently, there used to be each of the city councils had their own pet schemes. Waitakere, Rodney, Auckland, North Shore. So they expect this to be quite a contentious meeting. When I come and chair it, love to. So I love to use my skills where it makes a difference. The environment's very dear to me. So the meeting set up in the council chambers, right? It was a great bit like this, actually. Great big horseshoe of people. And there were 3 or 4 engineers from each of the city councils all sitting there with their plans all bristling away, ready to get into this meeting. What am I going to do to change the energy? I thought, I know, I'll talk about the ball in the field. And I was about to do that when all of a sudden, boom, I got like this flash of inspiration from above. Thanks, mate. Okay, folks, we're all here to create a regional policy on waste minimisation. We're all experts at that, which is brilliant. Just one question before we get started. Do we want this meeting to work? Huh? Do we want this meeting to work? Because if we do, I can see hardly any way that we can fail. And the fact that we all do it differently is brilliant, because it means we can all attack the problem from all sorts of different angles, and our differences become our strength against the problem. Anybody doesn't want the meeting to work, well, they mind explaining why, because obviously we've got to sort it out first. And they all said, no, of course we want it to work. Right? And it turned out to be a very successful meeting. So can I ask you all, what happened there? What was it that changed the energy from a really negative one to a very cooperative one? Anybody notice what I did there? Reminded them of reminded the purpose of the meeting, because I think some of them had forgotten that. So very much reinforced the common goal. Yeah, anything else you noticed? Yeah, thank you very much. So put them all on the same side somehow as well, set those expectations. I think I also addressed a few hidden agendas, because I'm sure there are quite a few people in that meeting there to sabotage the meeting, but didn't want to be seen to be the sticking point. You'll also notice I stroked their egos. You're all experts. Yeah, right, that's me. Some people need to hear that, right? So I made them feel important, and they're all the right answer. But if I had to put this into one sentence, which is the sentence I would like each of you to have ringing in your ears, not just for the rest of today, but with the greatest of sincerity for the rest of your lives, it's this. I reminded them that it's us versus the problem, rather than you are the problem. Now, that's not a technique, that's an attitude. If you and I have got a problem between us, can you and I work together against the problem rather than you're the problem? Now, would you agree, though, that most people don't see it like that? Yeah? Would you agree in most conflict situations, after a couple of sentences, the problem's gone out the window and it's me versus you and who's going to win? And we have to sort of always know, we've got to step back from that. We've got to use all the language and stuff. No, it's not me versus you. It's us versus it, whatever this week's it is. But we're on the same side here. I want to solve this just as much as you do. Got the idea? And then one of the things that becomes quite important in a conflict situation then is the geography of where this conversation, for example, is taking place. For example, you go along to the bank manager. There's the bank manager. There's you. There's your loan application. Can you see that across a desk, accidentally, that's quite a confrontational situation? Why? Because the problem and the bank manager are in the same direction. And the difference in energy that occurs when you sit there, he or she sits there around the corner of a desk, saying, what can we do to solve our problem? I don't know what it's like in your organizations now, but most organizations don't even have conversations across a desk anymore. But somewhere in the office, there'll be a low round coffee table. So that you sit there, your partner sits there, the official sits there, all equal around a round table. What can we do to solve our problem? Would you all agree, by the way, that a round table is friendlier than a square one? You go for that? Yeah. We haven't got much vocabulary in our language about it. The Chinese have got a whole science around this stuff. Feng shui and the shape of the room and the flow of the energy. Breaks my heart, for example. You see on television these, inverted commas, peace talks between the Arabs and the Israelis. And you see on television, they got this bloody great big long room. They got this great big long table. They got the Arabs down one side, all the Israelis down. That's not peace talks, that's trench warfare. If they really meant business, if they were really serious, to have a room bit like this actually, full of round tables, they'd say to the delegates, get in amongst those tables, go talk to each other, go communicate. Yeah. So can you see just the way we set up a conversation, where we're having it? For example, for many of your clients, offices could be quite intimidating places. How about we come to your place, or let's go for a coffee? Depends on what it is you're talking about. But just where, last thing on a Friday afternoon? Maybe not. You could leave, all those sort of things to take into account. Does that make sense? So, just thinking it through, basically it's not me versus you, it's us versus the situation. And that's an attitude thing, but you need to do everything you can do then to sort of reinforce that. Just a couple of other things then, just to move on from that, in terms of, negotiation. It's a short session. I can't do very much on it. But this is almost sort of, in a nutshell, what I'm saying here. That there are some people who are very soft when it comes to negotiating. And we talked about those. And you can see down the left-hand side their attitudes to those various. You've got that, I think, in your notes if you did print them off the website there. Hard people tend to have a victory as their goal. They tend to see opposition as opposed to a colleague there. They make threats. Whereas if you're principled in negotiation, we are solving a problem, we're looking for a wise outcome. And I think we're looking for mutual gain if possible, but this is, I think, the key one. Soft people tend to be soft on the people and the problem, so they just want harmony at all costs. Hard-nosed people tend to be hard on the people and the problem, so it's very aggressive. I quite like the concept, when I'm teaching assertiveness, the concept, if you're a really assertive person, I think of the analogy of a steel fist, but in a velvet glove. I'm going to sort this. I'm going to sort it with you. I'm not going to hurt you while I do it, but I'm not going to go away either. We're going to keep on talking, so I'm going to be very gentle, but I'm not going to yield on this. I'm going to get it sorted. And I think the next to bottom right, or next to bottom right there, rather than having a bottom line or having an idea of what you're saying, it's not avoid having a bottom line. You don't even know, I think, in many negotiations, what the outcome's going to be until you've heard the other side of the story, because you've only got a partial picture. And I think I've been quite intrigued to see how this turns out, but I'm open to all possibilities. And then that's quite a good attitude to have. Does that make sense? When I'm running workshops, just as a little thing here, when I'm running workshops on dealing with difficult people, when I first put this together, I assumed that difficult people would be clients. And it would be people external to the organization. Mostly when I run workshops on dealing with difficult people, they say, no, they're fine. It's the people I work with. It's the people upstairs, or it's this other department, or it's head office and stuff. And one of the things I do like to just touch on is the idea of having a set of ground rules when you're in a relationship with people. Now, this is a set of possible group ground rules for too many for one team, but not a bad idea. Has anybody got a set of ground rules for your office environment? Has anybody? You've probably got like mission statements and company values, but anybody got a set of ground rules? No, not a bad idea, because I get a lot of people sort of saying, this is a problem, and say, well, if you create a ground rule around that, it will make a big difference to actually nip some of those things in the bud before they get started. Around things like, cleanliness and timeliness and all those sorts of things, or, we value our differences. I quite like that one there. I like that one at the bottom. We celebrate regularly. We get drunk on a Friday. It's our rules. If we don't like them, let's change it. Very useful to actually solve some of the problems. I've not even talked there about who does the washing up. And in many office environments, that can be quite a bone of a contention. Or what happens to the lights at the end of the day, or who switches off, where are the car keys, all those sorts of things. So not a bad idea to have a set of ground rules. Just one little story on this, and then I'm going to give you some useful phrases. But one little story I was working with an engineering company recently. One of their big issues was they had cups of coffee after smoko break. There were cups of coffee left cold all around the office, and there was important documents and drawings and stuff. And every now and then, of course, someone would knock these things over. And it became quite an issue between the teams. Saying, well, why don't you create a set of ground rules around this? And what they did, they created this rule. And the deal was that everybody had to come to work with a very distinctive cup. So you knew whose cup it was just by the color of the cup, right? And the deal was, they agreed to this, was if you found somebody else's cup anywhere else other than rinsed out on the draining board 15 minutes after a tea break, right? If you found it unattended, you were allowed to smash it and put it in the waste paper bin. Now, I said, are you sure you want to do this? Because some of you guys are going to go through an awful lot of cups in the first week, right? But they said, no, this is a real issue. Let's get it sorted. So they did that on a Friday. Of course, by Monday, they'd half forgotten, right? But then, and for the first week, there was an awful lot of smashing because you found a cup and, of course, you nicely hid it and just disguised it. And, yes! But 3 weeks later, not an issue. 3 weeks later, everybody's learnt the new habit. It's not an issue. Got the idea. Sports teams use ground rules all the time. Some of you guys, I'm sure, are into sport. You remember Ali Williams a few years ago was across in South Africa playing for the Blues and got sent home halfway through that campaign. I don't know if you remember that particular story, but it became very apparent when that story came out. It wasn't management that sent him home at all. It was his mates. Because I'm sure the Blues have got a ground rule, one of which is show up to training sober. right? He didn't, so his mate sent it. Can you see, actually, that's far more impactful on the person that the team, it basically broke his own ground rule. During the World Cup recently, was it James O'Connor missed a game for Australia because he broke team protocol or whatever? I know, so it's really not a bad idea as a little exercise. If we were the most awesome team on the planet, what would be the set of ground rules we'd love to be working under? Right? One last one on this, and I'm going to move on, but this is a favourite of mine. You work with some negative people, I think, sometimes. You get a bit negative sometimes. How would this be for a ground rule? It's not written up there, but something along the lines of, we don't go on about a problem unless we've got a better solution in mind. How would that be for a ground rule? Because you agree you get people saying, oh, that's rubbish, that's stupid, right? You say, so what would work better than not a clue? All right? It's like we just handle problems. So how would that, we don't go on about a problem unless we've got a better solution in mind. I work for Richard, say, and I walk into his office one day and say, Richard, this invoicing system is crap. Walk into his office, and then I walk out again. Can you see from Richard's perspective, that wasn't a great transaction, right? What have I done? I've delegated a problem up, right? Whereas if in our team, we're not allowed to do that. And I walk into Richard after a while and think, hey, Richard, this invoicing system is rubbish, right? But what I think would work better is, Richard, oh, Dave, mate, good on you, mate. You've obviously, tell you what, how about we do it your way for the next 3 weeks, but do you mind driving that for me? Can you see I've taken ownership of it, Rob? I get people saying, the photocopier's run out of paper. That's an incomplete sentence as far as I'm concerned. The van's lost its warrant of fitness. So, can we just take some ownership here? So just a few tips, and that's within a team environment, right? Now, what I'd like to do, if I may, just if you've got a pen and paper, would you agree half the time we have problems not because of what was said, it was just the way it was said can sometimes be tricky? Can I just give you like a little verbal toolkit of some useful ways of saying some tricky stuff? It's almost like try these out because it might, so if you've got a pen and paper there, just make a note of these. I'll sort of guide you through them if I may. Let me just switch this off to start with. Now, so just a few ideas around useful ways of saying things. Yeah, and I'll give it a sort of put the scenario to you. Say, for example, you've got a situation, it might be a client or somebody who's ranting and raving and they're letting off steam left, right and centre, and you're thinking to yourself, if you'd just shut up, madam, we could sort this, right? But they're enjoying, this sort of, when they do calm down enough for you to get a word in edgeways, try, please help me to help you. Please help me to, actually, I work here, sir, and if you can just, I want to help, I want to solve it, but I need you to help me to help you solve it, right? So please help me to help you. Just have that there as sometimes that might happen to you. Here's a bit of wisdom, I hope, for you, and it's to do with angry people. Don't write anything down for the moment, but just tune on this. If I said to you, thinking of angry people, if I said to you that underneath anger, when someone's really angry, if I said to you that underneath anger, there is usually a far more vulnerable emotion lurking that's being masked by the anger, what might some of those emotions be? You think about the times in your own life where you've got very angry. And if I said to you, if you were really quite self-aware, you'd probably realize at those moments of great anger, there was something far more vulnerable happening underneath that. What might be some of those more vulnerable emotions be that are being masked by the anger? What might they be? Anybody? Insecurity, fear, right? If this happens, I'm not going to be able to stay in my house or something like that. Guilt, you've been caught out, trying something out. Hurt, right? You've cooked dinner for the family on Christmas Day, right? And you're just about to serve it, and you suddenly find they've all gone to your sister. Right? But actually, you're furious, but at the same time, you're devastated by how could they be? Got the idea? Basically, what am I saying here? You might be interested to know this, but anger is the only emotion that we feel that makes us feel stronger. So this is not conscious, it's a subconscious. It's almost like as a way to cope with a situation. Anger is usually, automatically. You get a dog that's scared, the hackles come up. It's actually just coping with the insecurity there. I realized this several years ago. I was driving through Whangarei with my old camper van through the back streets of Whangarei. Driving along, all of a sudden, out of a driveway, this 3-year-old boy comes running. Luckily I saw him, and he ran right across the road in front of me. Luckily I saw him just in time. About half a second later, out of the same driveway comes his mum. And she runs across the road, grabs hold of this kid, drags him back to the pavement. And as I'm driving off, I look over my shoulder, and there she is going, whack, 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 whack. Was she angry? Was she angry? She was scared to death that if that had happened half a second earlier, or if I hadn't been paying attention, my brakes weren't up to scratch, that could have been curtains. She was nervous, or she was scared, but it came out as a sort of anger, right? I realise this as well quite often at home. I'm building a deck. As an engineer, I love to build decks. Sadly, also, very often while I will whack my finger with the hammer. My partner comes up to console me. Get away from me! Now, I'm not actually furious, just far out. The only way I can actually handle the pain instantaneously is that surge of anger. So, a couple of wisdoms here, long preamble. When somebody's angry, if you can, have the wisdom to see what's beyond that. Why are they so agitated? Because chances are they're scared to death. They don't understand what you've just said to them or something else. But have the wisdom to see beyond that anger. And what do people most need when they're scared, fearful, whatever it might be? They need reassurance. And so here's the thing I want you to write down. Minimize the problem. So minimize the problem by saying, not in a disrespectful way, by saying something like, I'm sure we can sort this out easily. I'm sure this won't take a moment. I'm sure that. Don't you worry, madam, we do this sort of thing all the time. You may have no idea how to solve it, but say it anyway. Because what does that do? It gets this person out of this agitated, anxious, turmoil into a pair of safe hands, right? I'm sure we can sort this out easily. I'm sure it will. So minimize the problem. I've got an old house in West Auckland. A few years ago, I wanted to build a garage out there. One of those kit set Skyline garages? Got 3 companies to come and quote for it. 2 of them made it a big deal. Ooh, there's a sewer under there. That'll be piles. Next, close to the boundary, that's going to cost. Ooh. Old guy, third company, old guy comes along. And whatever I said to him, yeah, we can fix that. Yeah, a bit tricky, we'll think of something. Yeah, no worries. Who do you think I went with? Right? I don't want to know something. You're the expert, right? And now his price came in within $100 of the other 2, right? We finished up with piles. But the point is he minimized the problem. Oh, shit, never seen one of them before. Got the idea? So it's like minimize the problem. So I'm sure we can sort that easily. I'm sure this won't take a moment. Got it? Just try it sometimes. Next one. Do you tell me why this is so diplomatic, right? Anybody here traveled in the States? Anybody been camping in the States? Okay. Okay. Over there, you probably know. Then you've got like an honesty box system in the national parks. So you drive in, you get a sticker, $7 in the, for you, just to show you've paid, right? I was traveling a few years ago now with my parents and my girlfriend in one of these big RVs. And we're driving along in the Appalachians somewhere, drove into this national park. And as we drove in through the gate, there was the ranger. It was just by the entrance there. And caught his eye, smiled as we went in. Went in, found somewhere to park, went for a walk up in the hills, came back, had a meal, just about to go to sleep. Forgot to get the sticker. Never mind, we'll do it tomorrow morning. Next morning, we're sitting out the side of the van, just having breakfast and stuff, lovely sunny day, and the ranger comes wandering around. Hi, folks, where are you from? Oh, you're from Europe, where are you going to go next? And then he said, I guess you folks arrived too late last night to get yourselves a sticker. So if you wouldn't mind, before you move on today, if you could just do that for me, that'd be great. I guess you folks arrived too late last night. I know for a fact he saw us coming at lunchtime. And I thought to myself, oh, that is so diplomatic. I wasn't even involved in this sort of work. I thought, God, that is so cool. What was it he did that was so cunning? Why was that so cool? And he gave me an honorable retreat. He gave me my excuse for me. Right? Because he could have very much said, hey, what's the story you're trying? And I could have been, quick, think of something, right? He didn't do that. He gave me my excuse for me. So it's a master diplomacy here, right? So here's a tactic for you then, guys, right? Is to give people their excuse for them by saying something like, you probably didn't realize. You may not have been aware of. You know darn well they're aware of it because you've sent them 5 letters telling them. But the point is, you've allowed them to get out of this situation without losing face. And would you agree, for many people and many cultures sometimes, losing face is a big deal, right? So you probably didn't realize, mate, everybody else drives on the left. You know that they know that you know that they know, but for the sake of playing the game, can we just solve the problem and move on? Got the idea? So giving them their excuse for them. And it allows people to retain their sort of mana and not have to sort of, lose face, which is sometimes a big thing. Only a couple more now. This is actually, what I'm about to share with you here, is a very useful one. It's the verbal equivalent of the ball in the field. Say, for example, you've got a team member. And you've tried 3 or 4 times to improve their performance, and it's just not working, and you're getting more and more exasperated. Mate, I need you. with 3 or 4 times I've mentioned it now, and you said it was going to change, but it hasn't. And I'm really struggling, mate, now, because I don't want to get into letters of, warning and stuff like that. But I need you on board, mate. You're a key member of the team. But what would you now do if you were me? What would you now do if you were me? I need, Can you see, it's like, could you come stand in my shoes for a while? And just so you're a team leader and you've got a exasperating team member. You've got a client, you've five or six times you've tried to do something that's going to, and every time, no, that's no good. After a while, I think, mate, we're trying so hard. The whole company's had a thought about this particular issue. But we're running out of ideas now. What would you now do if you were us? You're actually saying to the person, how would you be handling you if you were in our shoes right now? And quite often people realize, you're not actually wanting an answer straight away. It's just, works very well with kids, by the way. I remember when Thomas, my son, was around about, 11 or 12, I can't remember. He'd done something that, I don't know what it was now. I remember saying to him, mate, I'm your dad, that's not okay. I'm really upset about that. Tell you what I said, you go off for half an hour and you come back and tell me what you think is an appropriate punishment for what you've just done. Yeah, that's just not okay. You go off and think about it. You come back and tell me what you think is appropriate for what's just happened. You should ground me for a week. I was only going to give him the washing up, right? But, when they're old enough to sort of have that, but it's just come stand in my... So when you've got especially an exasperating client or an exasperating colleague, say you're a team member, the boss has said, oh, no, I want to get your input, and so you give it and it never gets acted on. You say, mate, every time you ask us, we tell you, and then you say, yeah, but nothing changes. What would you now do if you were us in the team? When, every time you promise stuff, but it's not, got the idea? It's not, you're not exactly wanting an answer. It's just come standing, useful. Right, just a couple more now. I've written down here, seeding the subconscious. And that is, be careful what you say to people before you say what you're actually saying to them. For example, I'm quite often running a workshop like this in a hotel like this. As I'm presenting, all of a sudden the owner of the hotel will come in through the back door, and as he comes in, he'll say, I don't upset you guys, but... Now, never mind what he's going to say, how do you anticipate feeling about it? Upset? Why? Because he told us to, right? As opposed to, he could come with exactly the same message and say, I know this is going to be no problem whatsoever, but, yeah. So be careful what you say to people before you, as you lead it. If you're going to say anything, I do it all the time when I'm teaching. I've got an exercise right now I think you're really going to enjoy. As opposed to, I hope you don't find this too boring. Right? I get people coming to do presentations. Their first sentence in the presentation is, I'm not really prepared for this. Don't do that, right? So if you got something you want to introduce to a client or something or a team, hey guys, I've got a couple of really good ideas I think you're going to go for. Can you see it's just a throwaway sentence, but it primes them positively. So that's seeding the subconscious. Use that if you want to, but be careful what you say. You're not going to like this. No, don't say that, right? And the final one is if you want to put something in like sort of verbal bubble wrap. It's something that's a bit prickly. You're not quite sure how to bring it up. So you almost like, padding. It's like verbal brackets or verbal bubble wrap. It's to start the sentence with, by the way. By the way, Kevin, you're fired. It's something, nearly forgot. No, it's not. It's actually the whole reason for my conversation, but it sounds like an afterthought. I write entire emails, by the way, like this. It's like, hey, Richard, da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, cheers, mate. Best wishes, Dave. P.S., by the way, that invoice I sent you last week? Any chance of that before the end of the month? It's almost like, nearly forgot. No, you haven't. It's the reason for the whole email. But it just sounds like so it just softens it a bit. By the way, mate, that report you're going to get to me, how's that coming on? It's like, nearly forgot. Got the idea? So it just softens the impact. Useful. So have those as sort of like, as I say, a little verbal spanners. But sometimes it's not what you say, it's just how do I broach it or how do I get into it? And if that's useful to you, I'd be thrilled. Yeah? Any questions on that? Make sense? No, okay. I'm just about done now in terms of time. I've got just one more slide here. One of the great skills around resolving conflict, I think, is listening skills. Here's a cartoon, and especially if it's a shared experience rather than just a one-way flow. Here's an example of that. I see many times managers, talking to employees, and the employees are sitting there thinking, if you just shut up, mate, I'd tell you. But it's a one-way flow, right? So just be careful on that. If you happen to be a bit like me and a bit of a passionate, enthusiastic person, that's great. But be careful not to blow the other person out the water, right? One last story, and then I'm going to let you go. When I was last in the Middle East, I was doing a workshop on team skills, oasis town, middle of nowhere, 35 Arabs, all in their Arab finery, and I'm presenting away. And as I'm presenting away, the owner of the hotel kept coming in back of the room, listening in for a bit, and then disappearing. A bit later, come in again, listen, disappear. Went out to morning tea, and he came up and he said, Mr. David. I said, you're teaching team stuff, yes? I said, well, yes, I am. He says, I've got a picture I want to show you. I said, okay. So I went up to his office, and he came down with this great big ornate framed picture. And I took one look at it. I thought, yes, that is so good. I've got to get a copy of it, right? And when the workshop was over, I managed to take it out of the frame, turn it into a photocopy, and eventually into a slide, right? Because this will work in every country on the planet, right? And it encapsulates some of the things that we've touched on very briefly just in this last half an hour, right? I don't know whether you'd seen it before, but I hadn't. But I think it's brilliant. See what you reckon. Isn't it great? Isn't it wonderful? Right? You know, we pull harder and harder, we pull harder and harder and harder and harder. At some stage, we actually have to stop and think, hang on a minute, we're getting nowhere here. Then tell you what, you come and see what I've got. I'll come and see what you've got. And chances are at the end of all that, we'll all be better off. And with some of the people you deal with, it's a bit like that. Could we stop fighting? Could we just get on with solving the problem? Yeah?